I was directed to a video by the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. And we all know how important tradition is. Classic. Anyway, they put out a video on the horrors of transgender people trying to live their lives. Oh, the horror. Let's take a look.
It's pretty crazy, but I can go to any liberal campus and claim that I'm a woman, and students would agree with me. But if I were to go to a campus with a banner saying God created them, male and female, and distribute flyers against the evils of transgenderism, I would get a pretty negative response.
Yeah. See, the difference here is the former is people trying to be who they are in an attempt to live their lives without interference, something that doesn't affect anybody else, while the latter group is attempting to control and dictate how others should live, something most consider a type of harm. If you want to live your life as a woman, go ahead. That's your prerogative. It doesn't affect anybody else's life. Going around telling others how everybody else must conform to the gender roles you think they should does harm people. To give a similar example, it would be like asking the difference between somebody who complains about anti-Semitic policies and these guys.
Well, I'm going to give you 10 reasons that totally debunk this transgender madness. Number 1, transgenderism is tyrannical.
In one sweeping diktat, the Obama administration ordered that all public schools allow members of one biological sex to use the showers, locker rooms, and restrooms of the opposite sex. In one fell swoop, the federal government imposed transgender bathrooms on all schools in the nation. And the states that opposed the measure were threatened with severe penalties, such as the loss of federal funding.
Oh yes, the horror. How dare people make changes in the law to accommodate others? It's a sad fact of life that sometimes government interference must occur to promote equality between different people. There have in the past been government rules that needed to be put into place to assure equality based on one's skin tone, sex, or romantic partner. These have all been touted as tyrannical in the past, but have been necessary to let people lead fair lives. Allowing people to use the washroom of their perceived gender is simply the next important step in an ongoing process of equality.
Number 2, it fuels child abuse. Transgenderism is especially harmful to children. According to the American College of Pediatricians, conditioning children into believing that a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and healthful is child abuse. Endorsing gender discordance as normal via public education and legal policies will confuse children and parents, leading more children to present themselves to gender clinics, where they will be given puberty-blocking drugs. This in turn virtually ensures that they will choose a lifetime of carcinogenic and otherwise toxic cross-sex hormones, and likely consider unnecessary surgical mutilation of their healthy body parts as young adults.
Yes, that would be damning. Until you learn that the American College of Pediatricians is a small splinter group of conservative members who use their political beliefs as the basis of their decisions rather than the evidence. They split from the American Academy of Pediatricians over political views, specifically the right for same-sex couples to adopt children. Comparatively, the American Academy of Pediatricians has vehemently shown their support for transgender children, adolescents, and young adults to express the gender they are comfortable as. In other words, forcing children into the roles that you think they must conform to is more abusive than simply letting them be who they are. So, if you're against child abuse as you claim to be, let kids express who they feel they are without your own hang-ups shaming them.
Number 3, it contradicts biology and science.
Gender ideology contradicts basic biology. It's incredible. The same progressive movement that once worshipped at the secular altar of science, to the exclusion of God and metaphysics, has turned against its own science is everything dogma. Now, all scientific evidence that disproves the transgender narrative is discarded.
Again, the American College of Pediatricians is clear. Human sexuality is an objective biological binary trait. XY and XX are genetic markers of health, not genetic markers of a disorder.
I've already gone over the bias that the American College of Pediatricians has, but let's look at some actual science. Bed nucleus of the striae terminals, a structure of the brain, will more align with a person's perceived gender regardless of their outward sexual characteristics. In other words, a transgender person who identifies as female will have a brain that is more similar to a cisgender woman's brain, and one who identifies as male will have brain structures that resemble what is considered to be a masculine brain. Let me put this in a way you might understand. There's a very good chance that this bag will contain chocolates covered in a candy shell. If, for whatever reason, this bag was accidentally filled with Skittles by mistake, I wouldn't scream at the candies inside that they must be chocolate. I would just accept they were a candy that I didn't expect, but can be just as delicious. In the same way, while somebody may not match their wrapper, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be treated as the person they really are.
The norm for human design is to be conceived either male or female. Human sexuality is binary by design, with the obvious purpose being the reproduction and flourishing of our species. This principle is self-evident.
Just because somebody's been born in such a way they will be much less likely to breed doesn't mean they need to be shunned from society or forced to conform. For many reasons, people will be unable to reproduce and aid in directly continuing the human race. But that doesn't mean they should not be allowed to live the lives they want or contribute to society. If somebody is, for whatever reason, born or become sterile, they should still be allowed to live their lives as free as possible. The moment I transitioned from somebody with a working vas deferens to a blocked one, I was no longer able to participate in the obvious purpose of reproduction and flourishing our species. I made a choice that affected nobody else. Even if it meant that I couldn't bring more life into this world, it didn't mean that anybody had any right to stop me.
Number 4, biological sex cannot change.
Those who embrace the transgender ideology pretend that men can morph into women or that women can morph into men, but their claim is false.
It is physiologically impossible to change a person's sex, since the sex of each individual is encoded in the genes. XX if female, XY if male. Surgery can only create the appearance of the other sex, explains Dr. Richard P. Fitzgibbons, MD, Philip M. Sutton, PhD, and Dale O'Leary in a well-documented study.
Every single cell in our body is stamped with our biological sex, and nothing can change that reality.
Yes, on a DNA level, people's genetic code will say that their bodies are set up in a certain way. But if modifying somebody's body will help them live the life they want, why shouldn't they be allowed to? Yes, it may not be a perfect transition, but moving steps closer to realizing who you are is better than not being allowed to do anything about it at all. And to be pedantic, XXY and XYY, even XXX and X-null are real biological possibilities. And it has to be noted that not every transgendered person will go through surgery. Many will live their lives expressing who they are without opting for surgical or even chemical modifications. They will keep the bodies they were born with, but live as the gender they feel most comfortable as. My daughter was born with a genetic code that said her heart should not form in the standard way and therefore would not pump blood properly. It went against her genetic code, but she had several surgeries that, while not perfect, modified her body in a way that allowed her to live a longer and happier life than expected at birth, even without changing her genes. Really? I thought I made the bad jokes. Fine, play it.
Number 5, it warps manhood and womanhood.
It's bizarre, but transgender ideology claims that biological reality does not determine one's sex. Feelings do. Therefore, the differences between male and female, much like the clothing we wear, are separate from our identity and are constantly in flux.
The homosexual transgender and feminist movements are allied. They share the same final goal, the destruction of male and female, manhood and womanhood.
No, the point for these movements is not to destroy anything, except perhaps unneeded barriers that hold others back, but rather to help understand that there are people out there who do not always conform to the rigid identities that society has created. If somebody differs from the norm, they should still be allowed the opportunity to live life as they want, as long as they don't harm others. If one is born a certain way that does not conform to the rest of society, but one's lifestyle doesn't harm anybody else, why should they be forced to imitate others in a way that doesn't suit them? And getting back to your point, when you said transgender ideology claims that biological reality does not determine one's sex, this is actually the complete opposite. The biological reality of a person's brain determines, among other things, their sexual feelings and gender, even if that doesn't match the standard for their body.
Number 6, it destroys reason.
Part of logic and reason is the idea that things do have a purpose. The purpose of our eyes is to allow us to see. Likewise, the primary purpose of human sexuality is procreation. However, transgenderism, like homosexuality and feminism, deny this principle, and therefore attack human reason itself. But to attack human reason itself is really a form of deliberate madness. It's crazy.
It's true. We have evolved several structures that, in general, help us to survive, but they weren't designed by an outside source. For example, we have evolved vision to help us see the world around us. However, people have been born without the ability to see properly, either completely blind or unable to differentiate colors or lack depth perception. It would be unreasonable to ask them to live their lives as if these physical differences did not exist. They must either live with different techniques to help them navigate the world, or, hopefully, modify their bodies to live a better life.
Number 7, transgenderism is self-destructive.
The homosexual movement shatters lives. Regret, despair, and suicide are common among those who adopt the T of the LGBT lifestyle.
Walt Heyer, a man who regrets having lived like a woman for many years, said, "I knew I wasn't a real woman. No matter what my identification document said, it was obviously a masquerade."
This is actually a sad story, and I do feel for Walt and what he went through. Doctors are not gods, and a misdiagnosis can occur. Walt was misdiagnosed and should never have gone through gender reassignment surgery in the first place. This is why it's such a massive undertaking to receive such surgical changes. However, one sad case does not mean that everyone who has gone through gender reassignment surgery has the same story. For the vast majority of people who have had their bodies modified to match the gender their brains tell them they are much happier and content being able to live the lives they want. My long-term viewers know that, due to complications during surgery, my daughter passed away. This was a rare case, and doesn't mean that from then on I felt that all medical procedures should be stopped for everybody. One bad experience does not mean that everybody will suffer the same fate, or that we should stop trying to help those who do need it.
Number 8, where will transgenderism lead us? Transspecies?
If a man could pretend to be a woman, why can't he also pretend to be non-human? Well, such a relativistic conclusion is regretfully already here. It's called transspecies. It's also known as furries or otherkins. People with species identity disorder consider themselves non-human and are also featured at homosexual parades.
When feelings replace reality, logic dies. The intellect, the highest part of man, is degraded. Man's animal side rules. And our godless culture pressures us to play along with these depraved fantasies. Once these disorders are regarded as normal, what can possibly prevent the unbridled passions from introducing greater forms of depravity?
Ugh, I've heard the slippery slope straw man way too many times. First off, a trans identity is not pretending. As I mentioned, the main reason that a transgender person will identify with a gender that does not match their body is because their brains match the gender they identify with. To have a brain that is more aligned with an animal that we have millions of years of divergent evolution away from is so ridiculously unlikely as to be almost impossible. It's up there with the "I feel like an attack helicopter" meme that goes around. What brain structures would naturally align with a machine like that? As for furries, I have friends in that lifestyle, and I know at least one is watching. In general, While they enjoy dressing as an animal, they still recognize themselves as humans and they do not see themselves as a separate species. You are simply perpetuating another stereotype without understanding the people behind it. The reason that furries are often seen in homosexual parades is that the percentage of LGBT members of the furry community is higher than the standard slice of society, and the furry community is, as a whole, much more inclusive.
Number 9. Transgender ideology and religious persecution.
The transgender ideology may spark the worst type of religious persecution because it imposes a perversion of the mind, beginning with small children.
Wow, that is the worst kind of religious persecution? You really think things like the Holocaust pale in comparison to people just trying to live their lives and not letting you tell them how to live? I'm not sure if you understand this, but not being allowed to force people to accept your narrow view of the proper way to live is not religious persecution. Harming others who do not share your religious views is. I don't know what's scarier, that you would use cheap shots like this to score political points, or that you might actually believe it.
Those who oppose it are targeted by this new religion of equality, which obliges children to attend sensitivity training and gender indoctrination. Anyone who speaks the truth is labeled a homophobe or even a transphobe.
You know what? You don't need to like anybody. If you want to hate, nobody can stop you. As they say, if you want to be a small and closed-minded bigot, that's your purview. If you want to be creeped out because somebody doesn't match your thoughts on how people should behave, that's up to you. However, the moment you use that hate to harm others or encourage others to harm, that's when society needs to step in. If people are living their lives in a way that doesn't harm anybody else, let them live. Oh, and feeling somewhat uncomfortable that people do things you don't like doesn't count as harming you.
Number 10. It offends God. The desire to change one's biological sex not only denies reality, but it also offends God. Nobody is born male or female by chance, but in accordance with the plan of divine providence. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I dedicated you. A prophet to the nations, I appointed you. God created male and female. Therefore, to intentionally contradict the biological nature of mankind is an act of revolt against our Creator.
Okay, I've lost count of how many times I've had to add this to these kinds of lists. But not everybody follows your God. Telling other people they need to live life in a certain way because it's claimed that your deity says they must is forcing others to accept your beliefs over their own, which is actual religious persecution, the kind of thing you were railing against in your last question. Again, if you think it's a sin or against the wishes of your supreme deity to transition, here's a little tip for you. Don't do it. It should not be a mandatory thing. However, there is zero reason to expect others to follow what you think are the dictates of your God. Let people live their lives, even if it isn't how you would want to live yours.
Girls will be boys and boys will be girls. It's a mixed up